Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Bringing you another 2-hour-long compilation video to enjoy on this Sunday. So if you're listening with headphones, again, that's great. And if you're alone, even better. So sit back, relax, be sure to subscribe, and enjoy.
Serious. Redditors who got stuck in elevators, what are your stories? Working in New York City in a 70-story building, and I worked on the 34th floor. Leaving late on a Friday evening, nobody around. Got in elevator and hit ground floor button. Elevator sat a while, then started going up and up and up. I started bracing myself against the wall. Then it stopped and the doors opened to a concrete wall that said floor 60. Sat there for a minute, then went straight down to the ground floor. So not stuck long, but it definitely caused me to pucker up. I got stuck in one while working security for a hospital. A few of the elevators at the hospital were notorious for getting stuck. I was heading to a call and I got on, hit the button to go down, door closed and did not move. Tried to use my badge, then again hit the button, but the elevator would not move. Door was closed, but nothing. Called my dispatcher, let them know to get maintenance to get me out. As I was waiting, I randomly pulled on the door and got it open. Looked down to realize the elevator was not working because a screw was in the door groove. So I pulled my knife out, got the screw out, and got the elevator back running. Let me start off with this. I have a lifelong fear of elevators. I don't get on them. If I have to walk up 20 flights of stairs, I will, but I won't take the elevator. I was committed to a psych ward about a year ago or so. Depression, you could say. I got stuck in the psych ward for 2 weeks and thought I'd go the whole time without ever going outside, because the only way outside was on an elevator. But you'd be surprised how being stuck inside a depressing, ugly hospital ward with people way more severely mentally distraught than even you are for 2 weeks gets to you. The windows were so dirtied you could barely see through them, let alone get any sunlight. I had to go out. I was getting loopy in there. I eventually worked up to it, telling myself, people without this silly fear ride in elevators all the time, but it's fine. The odds of the one time in my life I get on going wrong are ridiculous. So, almost immediately, it gets stuck about 3 to 4 stories up. Now, I'm in there with, I want to say it was a 5 or so other mental patients and 2 security guards. I was in there for depression, but almost everyone else on the elevator had serious emotional disorders. They couldn't handle the stress very well. They had no sort of tools that we might possess to force themselves to remain calm, or at least seem calm enough in that situation. So now, I'm shoulder to shoulder with people screaming, pushing the security guards, flailing, hollering. One of them, a girl who weighed, somewhere in the 260s, let's say, begins charging from one side of the elevator to the other, rocking around, throwing herself forcefully onto the ground. I shit you not, the elevator shook so hard that she outbursted. I was pretty sure it was going to fall. It was absolute shoulder-to-shoulder pandemonium. Eventually, they tired themselves out after not too long, but that's when the real shit began. It was 90-something degrees in that elevator, and we were about 7 to 8 or so bodies packed tightly in for 2 hours and 20 minutes. The fire squad or whoever was on the other side trying to open the door and couldn't. Every once in a while, the hospital staff would shout to us from the other side that they were trying to get us out and couldn't. The sweat was rivers coming off of me, puddles on the ground, and I hadn't drank water all day. All I could do was feel my body screaming at me about how badly it wanted to drink water, and I knew there was water right beyond that door nobody could get open and wouldn't be able to for who knows how long. A couple of us took our shirts off. Had to, it was so crazy hot. I thought I could faint at any given second. I just kept looking at the wall or the ground and trying to tell myself it was going to be good soon enough. The security guards also lost their professional, we're running the show here, facial expressions and body language, and it was very apparent to me the situation devolved them into just 2 other scared, miserable people having a horrible day on the elevator with us, which was kind of scary to see. Anyways, over a couple hours in, they got us out back onto the psych ward floor. I never got to go outside, and I did my remaining week or so without going outside. Also, I have reverted to trusting my initial phobic instincts on this one. I haven't got on an elevator ever since and have no plans to. There is one elevator in my old school which was built on a hill. I was at the bottom floor in theater class. I forgot my script, ran up the stairs, got it, and went down on the elevator. At the bottom, the doors didn't open. I was like, okay, it's old, give it a minute. About 3-ish minutes later, I was freaking out. An anxious 10-year-old stuck alone in an elevator. I waited about 5 minutes longer just to see if the doors would open before I would call the help button. At the end of the 5 minutes, it just opened. My teachers freaked out at me because I was gone for a while. I took the stairs for a while after that. It has happened twice in my life, 34 female life. The first time I was like 13 and with my mom and other people in the elevator at the hospital. It kind of shuddered weirdly and stopped between the 3rd and 4th floors. We kind of all just looked around awkwardly, but one nurse, maybe 45 years old, was freaking out. She kept pushing buttons, trying to get the elevator to do something, and then started trying to pry the door open. The fact that she was freaking out was way scarier to me than being stuck in the elevator. Being with my mom helped too. The elevator mechanic had been there working on it and was able to make us move after only like 20 minutes, so it wasn't terrible. The second time was way worse. I was 19 and was staying at a hotel with my now husband. I took the elevator down and went to get something out of the car in the parking lot. I got back into the elevator to go back up to my room, but the elevator was acting weird. I got in, pushed for the 3rd floor. The doors started to close but then opened again. I pushed the door close button and it closed but didn't go anywhere. I tried pushing a different floor button, nothing. Tried pushing door open button, nothing. After a few minutes, I pushed the call button and a bell sound rang loudly. No response. I was only like 20 feet from the reception desk, but no one came. I rang it over and over with no answer. I started yelling and ringing the bell with still no help. I was bawling by this time. Finally, I heard my husband calling down to me from the 3rd floor. He ran down the stairs to the front desk to get help. They had a key to open the elevator door. They totally heard me ringing the bell and yelling, by the way. The receptionist said, I thought it was just some kids messing around. I was only stuck in there for like 45 minutes or so, but it was pretty traumatic. So mine might not technically count as stuck, because we were able to get out on our own, but I do photo work for a local newspaper. I was covering a high school hockey game, and I met up with the editor-reporter in the parking lot before heading to the arena. We walked in, got in the elevator to go from the ground level to the rink. There are literally no stairs. You must take the elevator. Door shut, we hit the floor, and the elevator goes up, but the doors didn't open. We then tried another floor, but the button wouldn't light up. We just sat there. Then the elevator spontaneously moved to another floor, but the doors never opened there either. We hit the call button, but no one answered. Eventually, we pressed the ground floor button, and it went, and we got out where we started, then found another elevator to take us up. I was giving a tour of our campus to 15 students. We got on the elevator within capacity, we didn't overload, and got stuck. I called for help once it became obvious we were stuck. For the first few minutes, we thought it wasn't a big deal, but as the minutes stretched on, some kids started to panic a bit. Needing to take control and restore order, I quickly grabbed my cell phone and we did selfies for a few minutes. We did serious ones, crazy ones, scared face ones, the whole 9 yards. We shared the photos between ourselves. It calmed people's nerves and we had a relatively good time. After 20 minutes or so, we were rescued, but we were between floors, so we had to jump up about 4 feet to get out. Everyone was okay, but I was so glad it didn't become mass chaos or a total freakout, as it certainly could have. It happened to me probably a couple of years ago at work. I usually go out and buy lunch with my coworkers, but that day I couldn't make it, so I went by myself. On my way back to my office with my foot at hand, I went into the elevator with a couple more people. Everyone got off on their respective floor, and I was the last one on the elevator. The door closes after the last person to get off, and the elevator just stops. I wasn't worried, but annoyed. The elevator had some switches to stop and start the elevator, and also an intercom for emergencies. I tried the switch multiple times and it didn't work, so I used the intercom to call for help. The operator lady took my info, location mostly, and waited a little while. I was getting hungry, so I ate my lunch there while I was waiting for someone to get me out of there. Probably after 20 minutes of waiting, I hear someone saying he is going to get me out. I hear the elevator restarting and a little movement, and it is functioning again. The door opens and I get out immediately. I got stuck in an elevator back when I was around 5 or 6 years old. I remember our landlord telling me and my cousin that there might be a power cut soon and told us not to use the elevator. So, me and my cousin, whom was around my age, went to tell our parents that we should use the elevator. And of course, they thought we were kidding or just being kids and didn't listen and said it'll be fine. We got stuck in the elevator for 1 hour. When I was 16, I took a weekend cooking class at a local college. The teacher was insane and crammed 14 of us into a small elevator so we would all leave the classroom at once. Our combined weight was too much for the cable. It didn't break, but we stretched it, I guess, and we ended up 4 feet below the first floor level. We pried the doors open to discover that we had bent the door catch and missed the floor. It took an hour and a half for people to come and replace the cable and pull us up to the door level to trigger the outer doors to open. An hour and a half, squished between 13 adults singing bawdy songs to take our minds off of things. When we were finally freed, I got yelled at by my friends for making them miss the train home. I took the stairs for a very long time after that. I was late to class one day, and just as the doors to the elevator were closing, some guy that I didn't even realize was behind me stuck his arm in and jammed them. The doors got stuck maybe 10 inches apart, enough that I could see out, but definitely couldn't squeeze out. I realized the doors were stuck and was trying to talk to the guy and ask if he could go get help, but he was silent and kind of hiding behind the door, so I couldn't see his face. Then he just walked away without saying anything. When I realized he abandoned me and there was nobody else around, this annex building was usually pretty empty, I pressed the alarm button, but found out that it doesn't actually call anyone, but just makes a loud bell sound. The elevator had bad cell service, so I couldn't call someone to come help me. I started to panic until one of my classmates, who was later than me that day, came by and realized I was stuck in the elevator and went and got help for me and told my professor I was stuck in the elevator. Maintenance eventually came and got me out, but to this day, I wonder why the first guy just walked away without saying anything. I also wonder about his intentions or if he stuck the elevator doors on purpose, because he was acting pretty sketchy and I got a very strange vibe from him. I had an elevator power outage in probably the most ironic places. A power plant. I used to work for a welding company that managed maintenance for industry, and we were working at a coal generator plant. 15 hours into my 16-hour shift, I hopped into the elevator for a quick trip between floors because I'm lazy. Suddenly, I hear a loud clunk and the room goes black. Now, I'm standing here in a room the size of a small coffin in the dark, not even emergency lights or a call button. I'm pretty much losing my shit when I remember I have a flip phone. So I call my boss. He tells me the plant had an outage and they're working on it, so I should just sit tight. I cry a little. About 4 hours later, he calls back to tell me they tried to get me out manually, but I was stuck between floors. Cue me cursing all existence in my standing coffin. The good news is halfway through my breakdown, the elevator suddenly lit up and started moving like nothing happened. When the door opened, I was met by about 50 people, including the local fire company. I savored every step I walked down as I left that night, and for the rest of the 3 weeks I worked there. I lived on the 6th floor of an apartment with a terrible elevator. I got stuck in it probably 5 times over a semester. Each time, I had to get the office to write my professors a letter for attendance excuses. Now, why would I still ride this elevator when it frequently screwed me so? Because the stairs were in the elements and Utah is cold. The elevator was heated. Even when it would go down, it was heated. And I like to read. I did a lot of good reading in that elevator. I regret nothing. Serious. What is your creepiest, most unnerving experience? Took a photo of my friend the first day at my new place. He helped me move and then we were just having a couple of beers and chilling. He went home, I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning cleaned out. TV was gone and my still unpacked boxes of electronics were all gone too. Door was ajar. I was looking at my photos a few weeks later and I saw a foot sticking out behind my friend in the photo. It was sticking out from a large overhead storage shelf in a small storage room, which was facing into the room and away from the main space. Robert was hiding there before I even moved in. I have the photo somewhere. When I was 11, my friend's dad had a psychological episode that resulted in him standing in the middle of the parking lot in his underwear, screaming and crying, and repeatedly cutting himself with a big knife. My mom made me go inside before the police got there. The next day, my friends and I went to look at the bloodstains all over the pavement. This probably pales in comparison to others' experiences, but it stands out in my mind. I don't remember this super well because I was pretty young, but a contractor that had just replaced the roof on my parents' house apparently didn't pay his employees after my parents paid him for the job. One of said workers showed up at my house very pissed off, yelling and screaming that he wanted money. I just remember being really scared and comforting my little sister who was crying hysterically. My dad didn't budge, and finally the guy gave up and left. We never saw him again. I witnessed a kidnapping. While going down a dark back road at night in the Middle East, saw some guys putting a long black thing into the backseat of a car. They were having a difficult time of it. I thought it was a rug, and it was only after I drove past I realized it was a woman in a burqa, but by then I was into a motorway on-ramp, so I could not go back. I thought of phoning the police, but I didn't know how to describe where I was. No mobile or GPS then, and street names were in Arabic. It took me 20 minutes to get back there, and everyone was gone. It shook me up a lot, and thought about what I could have done differently for months. When I was in middle school, I had a classmate who I didn't really know, but he friended me on MySpace. He would message me constantly, and even though I didn't know him, I always responded because I thought I was just being nice. He quickly started messaging really weird stuff about wanting to torture people and giving me facts about the Holocaust and stuff. I tried to ignore him, but he was unrelenting, and if I blocked him, he would just message me from other accounts. One day at school, I got called into the office, and when I walked in, I was greeted by several officers. Some girl's mom was checking her daughter's social media and saw messages from that boy. He was describing his plan to fight my boyfriend, and if I still wouldn't date him after that, then he wanted to kill me. Thank God the girl's mom contacted authorities and the school. Legal action was never taken, but the cops ushered the school to keep his classes completely separate from mine. Although the school was supposed to make sure he was never near me again at school, the next semester, he was a student in a class I was a TA for, and the school never tried to resolve it because all other classes were too full. I spent the next 2 years blocking all of the fake side accounts he would make to try and contact me. I was up in the family cabin with my uncle, stepdad, and grandpa, and at about 2 a.m. we heard something circling the cabin. It was easy to hear because it is one wood board separating us from outside. After a bit of that, we realized there was definitely more than one. Like, we thought we heard 5, but we could not tell if they were bipedal. We sat in the middle of the cabin with our hunting rifles until it was morning. One of two. In my early 20s, I visited Auschwitz with a close friend who was a prisoner there in 1944-1945 and lost his whole immediate family. He gave me a guided tour of his memories. It would take far more space than a Reddit post really permits to adequately describe. Second, I once house sat for someone in a rather nice house in central London for several months. I would sit on the balcony or roof to watch the sunset, city skyline, and smoke, not grass, weed. The house was entirely empty, but for a couple of grumpy, non-talkative cats. The next closest house was 200 feet away with a high stone wall around the perimeter. One night, around midnight, a young girl, maybe 12 to 13, started singing in what I think was Dutch, as if 10 to 15 feet around the roof of the house or loft. Rather spooked, I covered the whole loft, outside roof area that I could reach, and 2 lower floors, but could never find the source. The volume changed based on my movement or location. The singing stopped and started a few times and did not sound like a recording, but I couldn't explain it. To my knowledge, I'm not mad. I've never heard anything else like it, and no one played some elaborate practical joke. I still can't explain it, and still causes goosebumps. The owner also has no explanation. I went out with my brother-in-law at the time to a bar. I was sober, and when we left, this guy approaches us while we were just getting to my car. The guy asked me if I had a smoke or a light, so when I turned to make eye contact with him to respond, a white van pulled up behind my car, and a guy jumped out and opened the sliding back door. I told the guy I didn't have any, and he took a step closer to me. The guy with the van grabbed a bat from the back. I took a step back when they both approached me. All I could think to do was take off my stiletto and told the guy, "You can have this whichever way you want. I can stab you in the eye with this end, or I can kick you with the other." He backed off me, and they jumped in the van and took off. I've never been so scared in my life. I now always carry a knife and mace. Meanwhile, my stupid bro-in-law got in my car and sat there and watched this. Never thought to call the police or yell for help. This guy has been in the bar and left just a moment before we did. I don't know how he was watching us the whole night, but damn, dodged something crazy that night. I was in a really bad place mentally, emotionally, and financially. One evening, I was sitting in the living room and said aloud something along the lines of, Maybe everyone would be better off if I just killed myself. And as soon as I finished the sentence, the lamp next to me blew. Not just went out or flickered, but sparked and popped really loudly. It didn't work anymore after that. Probably a coincidence, but it was enough to make me reconsider, and I didn't kill myself. I was maybe 4 years old and in a department store with my mom and aunt. I don't know what my mom was busy doing, but I needed to use the bathroom, so my aunt took me into the women's bathroom, which had a few stalls. She opened one of the stall doors, and there was a woman laying on the bathroom floor, face up, with blood coming out of her mouth and a puddle of blood under her head, like she'd been laying there for a while. She was laying on the floor with her head by the door and her feet by the toilet, and she seemed to be conscious because she never looked at us when my aunt opened the door. I remember her eyes first going to my aunt. No facial expression, no attempt to speak or make any sounds, no movement other than her eyes shifting away from my aunt and then making eye contact with me. My aunt grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the bathroom, and she then rushed to find an employee to explain what she had saw. I can still picture the woman's face very clearly in my memory. I never found out what happened to her that day. A few years ago, I used to bartend in a historical hotel that had been built where a battle once took place. It was late on a weeknight, and I had just one guest left sitting at the bar. We're chatting as he finishes his drink. I'm filling him in on the history of the area and the cool old features our hotel had, like non-functioning bank vaults on some of the floors, the original water pump in the basement, etc., when I feel the back of my shirt get tugged so hard, my first button came up to my chin. Thinking it was our valet acting stupid, I turned around ready to smack, and no one was there. The guy at the bar jumped back, knocking his stool over and shouted, "WTF was that? No one was there and your shirt just moved." I'd never had to calm a grown man down before, so I immediately went into customer service mode, even though I was scared AF. I kinda laughed it off and said it must be one of our resident soldier ghosts upset that I was giving away all the secrets. I literally had to walk him to his room and called one of the valets to keep me company while I shut down the bar in record time. The next day, I found out that the guest had come downstairs at 3 a.m., demanding to check out because he woke up to the clock radio going off and his curtains wide open, which he swore he shut. Lots of creepy things happened at that hotel, but that I think was the worst one that actually happened to me. Went to a concert in a small mountain town in Massachusetts with some friends, and we drove up from Philly. Big rain delay, so everyone was hammered by the time we left. Decided we'd hit a bar before catching an Uber back to our hotel a half hour away. Very long story short, locals tried to take a few of us to our hotel in a van, and we had to run away. Guy looked at us dead in the eyes and said we weren't making it home. Called our Uber driver from earlier in the day, and thankfully he came back for us even though he was home in bed at the time. Of course, being a mountain man himself, that drive was still unnerving. Topped off with his forgetting to put his gas cap back on at the creepy off-road gas station, resulting in us pulling over in the dark to look for it. It was one of those nights where multiple pins were dropped in the group chat so that our friends at home could find our bodies. I still have nightmares. So, I'm a female who lives alone. Last year I'd been getting stalked, but at that time I didn't realize. I would see the same guy at the shops every time I went without fail, and he always made sure he was seen by me. But I live in a small town, so it's common to see the same person regularly. Anyways, it started becoming worse. Started getting creepy calls asking how my day was at the exact place I had been that day. Comments saying how I didn't suit this particular short I was wearing that day, too, and so on. Anyways, I finally realized I was getting stalked. The police apparently tried stopping it, but it continued. Then one night, I woke up to my dogs going crazy. I woke up to a torch shining inside my house getting brighter and brighter the closer it got. This fucking bloke ended up standing at my door saying how pretty I looked that day. I grabbed my machete in the cupboard right next to my bed and told him to leave or I would cut him. He ended up bolting out. Called the police and they arrested him. Ended up getting an IVO on him. While in the process of that, I found out he did it to another chick, except he raped her. I'm about 13 years old, sitting in my room, front corner of the house, and suddenly I hear this crazy crash outside. I didn't live on a main road at all. I get up and run outside to find my neighbor, 2 houses down, had drove intentionally through his garage and halfway out the back. Cops, ambulance, fire truck, it was a scene. Come to find out, he was trying to hit his house, not the garage, in an attempt to kill himself. 2 months later, again, he tried to hang himself and fell before he finished. Once he was able to leave the mental facility, a week later, he finished the job with a shotgun in the middle of the day, just after we all got off the bus from school. So, back when I was about 7 or 8, I was walking down a fairly populated street in Colchester as me, my mom, and my little brother were coming back from shopping, when randomly, an old man wearing only a long coat and shoes asks me personally about a very specific address. Me, being innocent and oblivious, tried to tell him that I didn't know where it was, but before I could speak, my mom grabs my hand and tells me not to look at him and walk faster. It was only when we got to the car that she explained that the guy was a pedophile and that he tried to lure me away, as that was one of their tricks. At the time, I couldn't understand well enough about how scary meeting someone like that was until later on in life, and thinking back now, it's still pretty unsettling to know people like that exist and actively try this. What are some scary and true paranormal encounters you have had? This happened to me around 2006-2007 in the summertime. My family and friends lived pretty remotely in the middle of nowhere near woods, trails, and cornfields. During school, my friend told me about how her family decided to adopt a new religion, whatever that meant. She explained her family went into a big city to speak to a religious zealot medium who can see stuff that we can't. She told me this medium knew there was a trail that led behind her house and knew there was a cornfield mixed in with the woods as well behind her home. Nothing spooky about that, seems pretty common knowledge given the area. Well, the medium also told her there's a demon, extraterrestrial mytho creature that manifests itself behind the home in the woods around 3:14 a.m. in the morning, and it tries to communicate through my friend, and thus why she has chronic hiccups. Now, of course, when she told me all of this, I didn't buy into any of it and thought it would be a perfect opportunity to scare my other friends, who were girls in my class. We were all friends, but I liked one of the girls, and that part is irrelevant to the story. Anyway, so I explained the story to two of my friends, and we decided we would go out in the woods that night behind my other friend's house in hopes to see this demon or whatever. The girls drove their car over to my house because we could walk to the trails from my house with no problem around 2:30 a.m. It took us about 15 minutes of walking to get to the location. The way the trail forms was pretty spooky because the trees hooked over us, forming a tunnel of leaves and limbs. It was extremely clear that night, and the sound of insects and wildlife was prevalent, so it wasn't that creepy. Time goes on, and I'm sitting on the ground, and one friend is playing on her flip phone, and the girl I liked was talking to me. 3:14 a.m. rolls around, and I start taunting whatever this thing is, and I start throwing rocks in the cornfield and fast woods nearby. About 5 minutes passed, and we decide to head back. No longer did it take for me to stand up and take 3 steps. Everything around us got dead silent. No crickets chirping, no movement. Out of the blue, about 6 feet in front of us to the right, a large branch snaps in two, and we hear the most ominous growl I've ever heard in my life. I've lived here my whole life and hunted. I've never heard an animal sound like that. By the sound of the limb snap, we fully expected to see something step out of the brush and greet us. Nothing did. The girls jump behind me, and we just stare at the spot for a solid minute, trying to comprehend what it was. We couldn't see a dang thing. It was pitch black, and our little flip phones didn't have the flashlight like these new phones have. I took a few pebbles on the ground and chucked them in the direction of the noise. Nothing. I decided it wasn't worth the risk of the girls' safety to head the direction we came, so I told them to run to the other way and I'll lag behind, just in case if it's a predator that likes to chase, it'll get to me first. As soon as they took off, absolutely nothing followed us. We managed to cut through the woods and onto a roadway that led to my house. We got back home around 4 a.m. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what it was. We went back a year later and nothing ever occurred again. I still hear the growl in my head and it sends chills down my arm. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia about 3 years ago. I have experienced stuff I couldn't even imagine before. I had strange encounters with really strange people. I saw signs and meaning in everything. I was literally terrified so often I can't even find the words to describe what happened. I think the scariest truly paranormal encounter I had was when I felt the presence of some kind of universal conscious being. When I was a child, 6 to 7 years old, my mom made friends with a very frugal born-again Christian couple with a little 3 to 4 year old and a baby boy 4 to 5 months. The couple themselves were friendly but odd. They would humbly boast about donating most of their money to a TV Angelicus. The mom was a homemaker and would spend hours comparing shopping to save a few dollars, mostly bought generic, etc. They lived in a 2-story house but only had one phone downstairs because they wouldn't pay for an extra line. The stairs and hallway had light bulbs in every other fixture to save money, I assume. It had one of those light switches that could turn on at the top and off at the bottom. This is important. One day, my mom, my sister, and myself are visiting, and my mom and the lady go grocery shopping. My sister and I got sent upstairs so they don't have to turn the lights on downstairs. Not a lot of toys upstairs, and boredom quickly set in. Everyone is napping but me, and I'm playing with the Noah's Ark animals and such, trying not to be too loud. Eventually, it's dark outside and dark inside, and I'm hearing noises from downstairs. I turn on the hall light and quietly make my way down the hall, turn on the stairs lights. The stairs were shaped like a U, with the only lit lights being at the top and the bottom of the stairs. When I got to the stairs, I yelled down thinking it's my mom, that she was back. I just didn't hear her come in. I definitely heard something downstairs, so I go down the stairs. There's no light on downstairs, and it seems really, really dark. I hear a voice from the kitchen, and I call out again for my mom. The voice tells me to come here, but something about it is scary, and I don't want to go into the dark. Instead, I stay on the bottom step, hold onto the handrail, and hang into the living room. I turn myself toward the kitchen and call out again for my mom. Again, the wrong voice, and I realized it was coming from a spot in the kitchen that is abnormally dark, as in darker than dark around it. I know, something is wrong. I run up the stairs, and I can feel something is behind me. I get to the middle of the U, and the stair lights turn off. I'm not in the dark because of the hall light, but I'm in shadows. I'm half running, half jumping up the stairs. I run into the hallway, lock myself in the bathroom. I'm crying and very scared. I even wet my pants. After what seems like forever, my mom and the lady finally come home. I got in trouble because of all the lights being on. I tried to explain to my mom and her friend what happened, but they wouldn't listen. My mom is so upset and embarrassed by my behavior that she has my grandpa come and get me and take me to his house. At his house, my grandma can tell that I'm really upset, and after a late dinner, she asks me what happened. I tell her everything. She tells me she believes me and that I don't have to go back to their house again. She told my mom, and my mom does not believe me, but my grandma made my mom promise to tell her friend to have her house blessed. I don't know if it ever was, though. Several months later, my mom has a dream about a gray, oily smoke traveling up the stairs and going into the baby's room. In her dream, the entire room is filled with it. She calls her friend, and after many rings, she hangs up. She tells herself she was being absurd and goes back to bed. Later that morning, my mom gets a tragic phone call. The baby was dead from crib death, and the mom had to be taken to the hospital. My mom made me go to the funeral, and the mom was mean to me. Her and my mom didn't stay friends for much longer, and eventually they sold the house and moved away. I was in rehab in 2006. The place was an old morgue and had a horrible vibe. I was trying to sleep, and I could just feel something in my room. It was so uncomfortable, and I knew something was there, but I didn't want to see what it was. It was probably 3 to 4 a.m., and what felt like forever, I opened my eyes and just looked above me, and I could see 3 shadows in the shape of humans or something moving around my room. I couldn't see faces or anything, just could see the shapes, and they were moving around my room and above me, like watching me. It was the longest night of my life. So many unexplainable things happened in that place, but that was a bad night. I have no idea who or what they were, and they didn't do anything to me besides hang out in my room looking at me. Creepy. 15-ish years ago, my husband's very close friend killed himself. After the funeral, I was home with our 2 very little kids, while my husband was out with family and friends at a bar. After sobbing most of the night, I decided to compose myself so I could be supportive when he got home. I tried on a pair of pre-pregnancy pants and was poking my leg and telling myself if I was too fat to wear them when my flip phone started ringing in my back pocket. I had paid to have my ringtone be No Rain by Blind Melon, but when it rang, this time it mooed. I could see that it was my husband, and it said No Rain was playing. I let it ring 3 times in my hand, and it was mooing at me. I was almost giggling when I flipped the phone open, and we agreed it was a very Justin thing to do. After we talked, I searched for a moo ringtone and couldn't find anything, not even a purchase. and I kept the pants on. They did fit. Thanks for mocking me one last time, buddy. This happened a few years ago. I've shifted houses since then. My mom, sister, and I were at home, and it was like 7 in the evening. Late winter evening, so it got dark soon. Here, we were living in a flat on the 4th floor, so the layout was basically in the hall. On the left, you had the wash basin, and my room beside it, and on the right was my parents' room. So it's 7 in the evening, and I'm in my room, and there's some problem, and the electricity went off suddenly, and it turned really dark. Now we had to get out. So I had picked out clothes and they were in my left hand. I'm calling out to my sister and mom to get the phone or flashlight, anything. No one replies. So I walk out of the room and I'm touching the wash basin. You know you had to hold on to something if it's dark. I'm calling someone out to bring the phone. My left hand has the clothes and is also holding the basin. Now suddenly, I feel my sister's hand sort of trace my right arm and interlock with my fingers. The weird thing here was that she wasn't replying, so I'm blabbering. I could feel myself continuously talking, but not able to stop, telling her, "Why are you holding me? Get the phone. I need to change. Why are you replying? We'll get late." I'm saying all this over and over. She holds my hand for a good 1 minute, and I'm blabbering the entire time. Now, she suddenly lets go, and the next second, the lights switch back on. There is no one around me, and my mom's room is pretty far. I mean, no one can walk into her room in the split second the light switched on. My mom and sister walk out of there, all concerned, asking me what I was saying, and how they were yelling over and over that they're trying to look for a phone or flashlight. When I was blabbering with the hand, it was silent. It didn't even seem someone was in the house with me. I thought it was a prank. I was terrified, and they swore they were in the room the entire time, together, and hadn't walked out in the hall even once. It was terrifying at the time, but looking back, it could have ended way worse for me. I was 5 to 6 and woke up at midnight exactly, had a digital clock by my bed, and walked out of my bedroom into the adjacent hallway. I heard someone in the living room and expected my stepdad or mom. I walked into the kitchen and watched as a tall man in a suit with an old hat walk through my parents' bedroom door. He looked at me and in a voice that simultaneously sounded like angels and the devil himself said, "I'm only here for your parents." Smiled and his eyes started to glow from behind his pitch black glasses. He walked past me and disappeared before he touched the front door. Even today, I'm religious. I don't know whether I saw a ghost, demon, angel, or the devil himself. Sadly, not as scary as some people's are. My grandma's house had 5 levels, and she had a ghost, pretty harmless, who would hang out during the day in the basement, lower basement area. The creepy part to it was one day, my family had to stay at my grandparents'. Everyone had a room beside me. I got stuck on the middle floor on the couch, right near the basement door, and turns out she comes up at night, and she would hang in the kitchen and stand right in the doorway where the stairs up to the kitchen were and the stairs to the bedrooms were. I was several feet from the stairs to the kitchen. She never did anything, but I felt her presence almost the whole night just staring at me. I didn't attempt sleep till the sun came up. This happened quite recently. I'm honestly not too scared of it now because I'm always home alone and I got used to horror somewhat. So I awake around 2 to 3 a.m. Only me and my mom are home. If not for my dog staring at the door for 30 minutes, I wouldn't have cracked my door open. He's kind of my watchdog. I'm just watching YouTube, minding my own business, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a white figure through the crack in the kitchen next to the hallway. I don't think much of it because I thought it was my mom. But about 10 minutes later, I realize she doesn't wake up at 2, she wakes up at 4, and I would have heard her footsteps since there are a bunch of creaks. So, this kind of spooked me, so I just went back to my videos. An hour later, I see another figure, but it was black. The light was on. No damn face. I could see it standing there, either staring at me or the oven. Again, didn't hear footsteps, and my mom doesn't wear black. Then I started walking into the hallway towards the front door, and my dumbass decides to go check it out. But obviously jack shit was there. Freaked me the fuck out at the time, but as the days passed, I stopped thinking about it and just went on. But kinda whack to see a white and black figure. Can't really remember if the white figure was more gray or white, but oh well. A weird orb of light at the top of a mountain. Was fooling around with a girl in my car at the time. This orb of light appeared behind us. First thought it was a flashlight or something, but it gave us the creeps, ruined the mood, and we got out of there. Thing is, I drove down the mountain and the fucking orb of light kept up. It was bright, but didn't illuminate the trees and shit around us. The girl kept telling me to drive faster, and I was trying not to crash. Couldn't keep my eyes off the rearview mirror. Possible it was a tailgating car? Managed to get to the bottom of the mountain. I hit the residential streets, the light disappeared. Either way, it shook us both. She didn't want anything to do with me after that night. Feeling was mutual. Felt this urge to just put distance between me and that event, and she reminded me of it. When I was 8 to 9 years old, I walked through a tunnel only people could go through, and a lot of people died because of shootings. I was walking, and since the tunnel had no lights, I saw my shadow, and I saw it change into different objects. The first shadow I saw was an individual was behind me, but there was no one in the tunnel but me. When I looked back at my shadow, it disappeared and was replaced by an inflatable armed man. I ran out of that tunnel and never walked through it again. It was Halloween. I dressed up as Kyle Broflovsky. I was 12, so anyway, me and my friend and our parents knocked on this specific house. My friend said, "Hello, I'm a fairy." The door opened and I see this person with a smile from ear to ear. Yep, I have no idea what that was, and I lost my black shoes from that. The year 2011, PE class, 7th class, middle school. We were sitting outside of the school. Teacher was showing us some movements. There was another school in front of us, 260 foot. I saw a black, long woman figure at the door staring into us. School was closed, but you can enter the school. I told my friends none of them saw the ghost, I guess. I decided to go in. When I entered, I felt cold and I get goosebumps, and there was some kind of wind coming from the back, and I freaked out and ran. The worst thing about that was, last year a girl died in school on the same day it was, 7/3/2000. It was a homicide or natural cause if I remember it right. Didn't happen in school. Was sitting in the main area of the house we used to live in. Open plan layout. There was a countertop between the kitchen and the rest of the room. The bench tops were pretty high, so no chance my toddler could have done this, and husband was in the other half of the room. So I'm just minding my business, and for some reason decided to turn and look behind me. As I did, I saw my pillar candle, which I kept in a decorative bowl, just lift up in the air and clattered into a pile of dishes that was nearby. Thing had to be a good 6 inches off the bench top. Later, after we moved, the same candle took a leap of faith off the top of a bookshelf and ended up splitting down the middle. All of this only ever started happening after I brought a framed piece of artwork home from a secondhand shop. So really weird. I made an offering of milk, honey, and chocolate to it just for kicks and curiosity's sake, and haven't had anything weird happen since. So, painting ghosts like chocolate and hate cheaply made candles, I guess. What is a childhood memory that you now look back on and know it was creepy? When I was like 9 or 10, I had a friend who developed early. I remember my friend being over one time and my aunt was over the same day. My stepdad looked at my friend, looked at my aunt, and said, "Hey lady, this girl has bigger tits than you." At the time I was like, okay, but now I can only imagine how my friend must have felt. When I was in 1st or 2nd grade, and myself and a friend were out in the field playing ponies at recess. Then after a few moments, we realized it was weirdly quiet, and we looked around and saw that no one was outside anymore. Apparently recess had ended and we hadn't noticed. We went to the doors and tried to open them, but they were locked. My friend started crying, and I had a bad feeling too. So I took her and made her hide with me behind this big tree and kept telling her to be quiet. Eventually, I noticed this guy was walking in circles around the outside of the fence around the school. My friend thought he was the janitor and he had a key and could let us back in the school if we asked. I didn't know why, but seeing him freaked me out, and I instinctively knew we shouldn't approach him, so I made her keep hiding. Eventually I heard sirens, and then after a while, I saw my dad's truck come careening into the parking lot and screech to a rough stop. He jumped out immediately and started yelling for me. I started crying because I was so confused and I thought I was in trouble. He ran over and pulled me and my friend into the truck and then went to talk to some cops that had pulled up too. I couldn't really see what was going on, but after that, my dad got us ice cream and told us everything was fine. We weren't in trouble, sorry if we were scared, and he took my friend home. Years later, I had vague memories about that day and how confusing it was and asked my dad. Turned out, the guy circling the school had a gun. Someone in the neighborhood had seen him walking toward the school and reported it, and all the teachers and recess aides had silently gathered all the kids from recess and brought them in to lock down the school, but hadn't seen me and my friend out in the field. When they did roll call, they saw we weren't inside and called our parents. The cops came and arrested the guy, and my dad came straight from work to find me. If my friend and I hadn't hidden and stayed silent, or if we'd approached that man, we most likely would have been killed. When I was under 8 years old, during Halloween, I was trick-or-treating in a slightly unknown neighborhood. My mom would wait at the sidewalk while I would walk up to each house and ring the doorbell. I was going up to this small house with a particularly long walkway, and some other random kids were behind me. The door opened and it was an old man with glasses. He made sure to give everyone a pretty decent amount of candy, like a handful each. Everyone walks away, including me, who's a considerable distance behind the rest of the random kids. Then I hear, "Hey, I got some more candy in the bag if you want some." I turn around and see the old man peeping behind the front glass door, and there's a glare in his eyeglasses. I nervously giggle and go, "Oh, no thank you," and walk away. I kind of realize now how creepy that kind of was. I tell some people the story, and they say that maybe he was just trying to be nice and give us more candy, but it makes me uncomfortable. When I was about 10 and my sister was 15, she was babysitting me with her friends. There was one friend, he was about 18, who was kind of weird. At one point I went upstairs to go to the bathroom. The weird friend followed me. I went back downstairs to get toilet paper, and the friend pinched my butt. I thought it was strange, but I didn't care. Then I asked my sister what a butt touch meant. She asked me why, and I told her. She told me to go upstairs. I heard her call our parents. Apparently my parents called the police. He's in jail for molesting another child currently. Probably the amount of times my uncle playfully spanked me or made comments about my developing body being cute. There's plenty of other things about my childhood that stick out as disturbing looking back, but this one bothers me more because he always did it in front of people and no one said anything. Just because a child predator is comfortable with an audience doesn't mean they're not a predator. It just means they know they can get away with it because people are under the impression they're not doing anything maliciously. Wondering why my mom wouldn't let me sleep over at my big cousin's house, who had daughters my age I liked hanging out with, then finding out the answer to that question when he beat his girlfriend on the 4th of July in front of the entire family, plus the way he would always touch me whenever I was around him. When I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, I was doing some fundraising for some kind of Girl Scout group, but they assigned me alone to a grocery store entrance. My father sat on a bench nearby while I asked lots of strangers to donate change. My father was keeping an eye, but I expect this was a boring afternoon. At one point, 2 men came up to me and kept asking for directions for a business downtown. I was able to point generally in that direction and just told them to drive there. My father wasn't paying attention at the conversation. The 2 men kept saying, "We don't understand. Can you come with us to show us where it is? Come with us. We can drive and you can show us where it is." I think I got spooked, and I finally called my father and asked him to explain where this place was. The 2 men quickly left. When I was a kid one summer, the ice cream man came up to our street almost every day. We lived on a dead-end street and it was sort of out of the way. Well, we thought this ice cream man was pretty cool because he would talk to us and give us shit for free. He would take pictures of the girls in the neighborhood who were 5 to 10 years old. I didn't think of much of it back then. Now I look back and know it was very creepy. When I was 7, I went with my neighbor and her daughter, who was 5, to walk their recently acquired dog. At some point, the dog ran away and the mom had to run after it. She was within eyeshot. As soon as she was a couple of meters away, this dark-haired guy in a white Volkswagen pulls up and asks us to get inside the car. It's gonna be fun. I didn't understand at the time he was trying to kidnap us, but I said no and said that lady was our mom, and he just left. I know it isn't creepy, but still weird, I guess. So when I was like 5, I think, I had this blanket somehow. If I went under it, counted to 10 and came out, it was magically daytime now. I swear it wasn't a dream. I can remember one of the days I did it. When I was like 8, Dad dismantled my bed. I straight up don't know why. He just destroyed the bed. So I was angry because I knew the blanket wouldn't work anymore because it was disturbed. So I told my dad to put it back together and put it in the same place it was before. I went under the blanket and it didn't work. This was the biggest disappointment of my life. I legit started crying because it didn't work anymore. This memory of the magic blanket just randomly popped into my head. TLDR. I'm pretty sure I had a time-traveling blanket. When I was 16, there was a gal who was 21 that really wanted a bone and told me she was super into the fact that it was illegal and I was a virgin. I did find her super hot, but was a virgin and chickened out, which I always looked at like a missed opportunity and kept that mindset for a long time. Then, when reminiscing with a group of friends after a few cocktails about virgin stories, don't ask me how this shit comes up, They pointed out that that chick was pretty fucking weird. I don't feel abused or anything. I want to clarify. I'm not traumatized. Just in hindsight, losing my virginity to a weirdo may not have been that letter to penthouse story I always assumed it would have been. Maybe she was just bananas, and that wasn't the lost opportunity I always imagined. I used to go to a taekwondo class, and we'd do this thing where we'd shake hands with all the instructors and masters. One instructor would do this thing where he'd rub our hands with his finger while shaking. Me, not knowing better, did this for fun to my dad, and he asked me who taught me this. I was never sent to that class ever again. The stories my best friend in elementary school made up and her imagination. She would regularly claim inanimate objects were alive, told me a metal pipe in the ground was a dead, metallized snake, claimed all kinds of shenanigans in her family, that her grandmother was an evil witch who wanted to kill her dog, and that she was going to take him away any time, that her phone was alive and sometimes powering itself without being plugged. She had an old Nokia, and much more I can't recall, but I remember thinking she said lots of made-up stuff she genuinely seemed to believe. But as a kid, you don't know any better. Now that I'm older, I realize she was from a poor family, with only mom and little sister, dad nowhere to be seen, and possibly some toxic family, and her imagination made up stories were probably results of trauma and God knows what else going on in that family. We fell out after I moved away. Last I heard, she was trying to study to be a nurse. I hope she is doing better. Just everything about my aunt's boss. When I was like 5, I had a crush on him and he'd pay me money to get ice cream, take me to go-kart riding, etc. Overall nice guy, never did anything directly creepy, but got me to sit on his leg a lot. Not like perverted, but like if I was on the ground, he'd pick me up and put me in his lap constantly. But yeah, he'd randomly give me money a lot, and oof, a lot of people she works with are sketchy. So, some context first. I wasn't raised by my parents, and so my grandmother took care of me my whole life. Anyways, I was still in junior high school, around 14 to 15 years old. We had moved out of this old big house into a fairly smaller house right next to a park because it was just me and my grandmother living together. I settled in and became comfortable, and it was right next to a park. How hectic. So what happened with the big house? It was as empty as money in my wallet. Just room space upstairs and downstairs. My best friend was going through some love life experiences with his first or second girlfriend, and he asked me if he could borrow a room there because we were too young to book any B&Bs or rooms for ourselves then. I said, sure you can, as any other best friend would. Only problem was our timetables didn't match up well at the time because we were both busy, so I took it upon myself to bike roughly 12 kilometers back and forth in the middle of the night. It was some pretty good and intense exercise. P.S. I snuck out too. Oops. The night, however, I was blasting music, sweating balls, biking in light rain to my homie's house. I was passing this motorway bridge, and there was some bush in that area with tall trees straight out of the Slender Man game. I suddenly heard like a 3 to 5-year-old scream, as clear and as loud as an emergency siren. It sent shivers straight down my spine, and my adrenaline rushed through my blood. I had never pedaled that fast in my life without thinking or looking at where the scream had come from. I still think about it to this day, whether I should have checked it out or if I saved my life by running away. What is your oh shit, I've got to get the hell out of here right now story? I was driving north on I-65 in the middle of Indiana. The sky was getting dark, the wind was picking up, it started hailing. I turned on the radio to hear that a tornado was nearby. I determined it was behind me going from southwest to northeast and about to cross over the interstate. Other cars were driving slow or pulling over because of the rain and hail. I was hauling ass to get away from there. I lived in South Everett, Washington for a couple of years. Was walking home from the bus stop to my apartment, which took me behind the Home Depot. Suddenly, a van starts following me. I hear the side door slide open and look behind me to see a man with the top half of his body hanging out the slider door looking at me. I took off running towards my apartment, literally running as fast as I could. The van started going faster. By chance, a guy was pulling out of the driveway of my apartment complex, sees me running for my life, and stops. The van immediately turns around and speeds off. Guy asks if I'm okay. I ask him to just stay there and please watch me walk into my apartment, which was the building next to his. He did, thank God. I started carrying mace and a very large knife the next day. I was walking to my house from my ex's house very early in the morning when I saw this little girl with a backpack running for her life from 2 big street dogs. At that moment, I didn't think, and I ran towards the dogs and missed a kick. The 2 dogs came after me, biting my legs and arm. They were out of control, and these were like the longest 5 minutes of my life. I couldn't stop them from biting me. The little girl kept running until I didn't see her anymore. It was just me and the dogs attacking me. I tried to climb a fence to get inside a house, but I couldn't when a taxi driver stopped and went out of the car with a short stick, and he tried to scare them off, giving me a chance to run, and without thinking, I got inside the car. The guy just ran a couple of times around the car with the dogs behind until he got in, and he drove off like really fast. He took me to the hospital where I got a lot of stitches on my leg, arms, and hands. That guy is my hero. Every now and then, I go to his taxi stop and give them sandwiches or something. We never knew what happened to those dogs. I worked for an agency that helps people do their daily tasks for home health care. I had a man whose insurance prohibited personal care, like a shower. He was very upset during my visit when I declined his request for bathing. I felt bad at first, but soon the man became very angry with me. He accused me of all kinds of things and started pacing around room to room like he was looking for something. Between that and his spit/yelling rage, I slipped out of the house and drove to a safer place. I reported the incident to my employer and later found out that this person is a sex offender who had previously raped another woman. Who knows what he was planning that day? Maybe nothing, but I'm glad I left. I was solo camping in the woods during a phase where I wanted to be a survival expert. I hiked out miles from any roads or buildings, built a shelter, and then hiked back the way I came. Less than a mile away from my camp, I found a dead coyote, decapitated, gutted, and laid out like a sacrifice or something. The eyes were gouged out, and it was strung across a big flat rock, a rock which I used as a marker on the way in, so I know it hadn't been there a day before. I ran out of there as fast as I could, knife at the ready, probably 10 miles back to my house. I still have no idea who would have done it, but I know I didn't want to run into them in the woods alone. After I graduated from college, I finally landed an interview with a guy who was starting his own company. The economy was shitty, and so I wanted a job. I went in for an interview and quickly noticed that he double-locked the door behind me. It was a small office in a strip mall. I immediately started to panic and then realized that no one else was there. He had me sit down, and 2 questions into the interview, he tried to put his hand up my skirt. I was wearing a business skirt suit. I got up and ran, and thankfully was able to open the locks and get the hell out of there. My mom accompanied me to every interview after that for a while. My friend and I met at Waffle House for lunch. A guy came into the restaurant looking for a piece of paper that he had accidentally left on the table. The waitress didn't know where the paper was located and might have thrown it away. The guy got upset, saying the paper was important and he was going home to get his gun stored under his mattress. My friend and I quickly paid our check and got the heck out of that restaurant. One time, I was driving through Kansas in the middle of the night with my girlfriend on a road trip, summer of 2017. We had issues with the car breaking down in Nebraska and were spitting along until we reached Colby, Kansas, and waited for night so the roads were less busy. As we were driving along, not Highway 70, but just south to stay off the highways, a semi caught up to us. The car didn't want to go past 50 to 60 miles per hour, and I didn't want to push it and break down. Needless to say, I was going too slow for this semi-truck. For about an entire hour, this guy's riding my ass, flashing his lights, etc. Never honked his horn though. I would slow down and pull off to the side a little bit to let him pass, but every time I did, he would slow down too and give me a ton of space. It's now about 2 to 3 a.m. We're in the middle of nowhere, coming up close to the border of Colorado. He's still constantly riding up to my ass and turning his lights on and off again. We finally come across a gas station and pull over to a pump on the right side. I cannot emphasize how literal I mean by middle of nowhere. It's flat deserts forever in all directions. It's an empty shell gas station that is closed and dark AF. We hope the truck will just pass us and we pretend to pump gas. This fucking truck slows down all the way and stops right there on the road next to us. He proceeds to back his truck up enough to pull into the gas station behind us, perpendicular to our car. I start losing my shit and looking around. I'm standing outside of my car, and my girlfriend is screaming for me to get back in the car. This guy gets out of the semi and starts walking directly towards us. He's only about 50 yards away when I notice a small brown pickup truck sitting on the back side of the shell, eerily placed. I notice there is someone in it. I run towards him. As I get closer, I realize there is a police badge painted on the side of this brown pickup, and the man inside is actually an officer. I can only imagine what the guy on late night duty was thinking when I'm running up to him. He rolls down the window with a confused look on his face. My girlfriend is screaming at me in panic as this guy gets within 10 yards of the car while I'm spitting about 50 words out of my mouth in about 2 seconds explaining our situation. The officer doesn't say a word and just drives around our car. The man notices and does an immediate U-turn back towards his truck. As the officer is yelling at him to stop, I hop back into my car, look in the rearview mirror for a second to see the officer getting out to try and talk to this guy. I turn on the car, hit the gas, and drive into Colorado a few minutes later. I will spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if that officer wasn't just sitting there that night. Whoever you are, man, bless your soul. Was waiting for the next bus in a bus station at 2 a.m. in Minneapolis. A security guard outside told me to stay within the camera zone. I sat down and waited, all alone except a couple of junkies in another part of the station. Suddenly, a guy comes in and walks up to me. This guy, dressed in a black hoodie, wearing a skeleton mask, stood right in front of me, didn't say a word, just stood there and looked at me. When he started to walk away, I bolted out of there, ran down the street, and luckily found a 24/7 Walgreens. I was the only white guy working at a Hispanic restaurant, and I don't speak Spanish. That's part of it. One night after work, I get invited to drink at one of their houses. All is good. We're drinking, and I even danced a bit. Then after going outside to the back patio to smoke a cigarette, I come back inside, and the guy whose house I was at has a knife and is yelling at these 3 coworkers of mine, blocking the front door, yelling in Spanish that no one is leaving. I knew that much. A bar patron, who knew me, grabbed me and pleaded to the guy just to let me and him out since we had no part in it. The homeowner lets us both out. I asked the bar patron WTF was that when we're outside since I can't speak Spanish, and he says the guy thinks my 3 coworkers are sleeping with his wife and he's probably about to kill them. I got in my car and got the F out of there. I was leaving for work at 5:30 a.m. while it was still dark. I locked the inside door handle and walked out the door, pulling the door closed behind me. As I turned around to walk off the porch toward my car, I saw 4 men jump out of a van and start coming toward me. The street was otherwise empty. My heart was pounding, and I felt panic start as I was digging in my big messy purse for my keys to unlock the door and get back in my house. The whole time, I'm just thinking they're going to grab me, shove me in the van, and rape and kill me. I was able to get back in my house before they made it to me, but it scared the shit out of me. Turns out they were immigrations officers looking for someone who used to live in our house, and that is standard practice for them if they think the suspect will run. When I was 17, I met with a 23-year-old guy for a mall date. Can't remember his name for the life of me. I had just gotten out of a horrible relationship and was trying to distract myself. We had dinner, and when the waiter brought the check, the guy told me he had forgotten his wallet in his car, and that if I went with him, he could grab it. I told him it was fine and paid for the meal myself. We went into a couple shops, but he kept asking me questions about my ex-boyfriend. Also, he mentioned that he had been in jail but wouldn't tell me what for, and I was nervous. The things came to a head when he kept saying, "Hey, just come to my car for a second, please. Let's listen to music," and kept getting increasingly anxious every time I declined. I was so scared. I immediately pretended to have a period emergency so I could get out of there, and luckily, I had parked in a different lot than he did. I still have no idea what his intentions were, but man, that was terrifying. I woke up one Friday in a hotel and the internet was down. I went to the hotel lobby to see what was up and saw scenes of chaos on the TV. A crowd had started to gather to watch, including the hotel staff. One employee told me the government had shut down the internet to test it. The scenes on the TV were of violent protests beginning all over Egypt as people made their first push to occupy Tahrir Square. It was January 25, 2011, and I was in Benghazi, Libya without my US passport. Needless to say, I spent my energy over the next few days trying to get out of the country. I was able to leave, but many of the people I was working with weren't as lucky. The revolution started in Benghazi less than 2 weeks later. It was surreal watching Anderson Cooper broadcasting live from the hotel I had just been staying at. I was living in France on my own, and I got a tutoring client. A man wanted me to teach his young daughter. First session, he offers to drive me home, spends the entire time asking about a boyfriend, where I live, etc. Second session, he wants to give me a tour of his house. I noticed he was standing in the door when we went into a room. Once we got to the second floor, I grabbed his daughter so nothing would happen. After that, I tried to quit, and he guilted me into coming 3 more times. Every time I got so anxious beforehand I wanted to puke. Every time he would offer a ride, and I took the 2 hours of buses home instead. Finally, I fully broke it off. I knew something bad was going to happen to me and confirmed it with a few other young English-speaking women I knew. He was recruiting at his best his second wife, but they all got extremely bad feelings being alone with him. I was in Thailand back in 2010 on the Southern Isles after a full moon party. My friend and I were talking to two girls who invited us to play poker. We went and sat down with two German guys and two burly Thai guys full of tattoos and began to play. They were joking, friendly, and the buy-in was $10. We lost some pots, won some pots, and overall it was a happy experience. The Thai guy beat us, and on the last hand I managed to claw my chips back to about $8. My friend was looking tired, so I gave him the nod. I thanked them for the game, and I said we would cash out and we would be on our way. The Thai guys put a machete on the table and told us to fuck off. My friend, myself, and the two German guys noped out of that situation as fast as we could. On the way back, the girls caught up with us and apologized, but it meant fuck all because they were clearly in on the take. Lesson learned, if pretty girls ask you to play a game, it's for nefarious reasons. My ex-husband came into our bedroom where I was sleeping and screamed into my ear, "You and your mom need to stop playing mind games with me." Understand, I didn't speak to him much to not set him off. He hadn't spoken to my mom in 3 months. Without looking at him, I walked downstairs in the dark to sleep on the couch. As I was laying down, a big ceramic lamp flew by my head and smashed against the wall. He followed me downstairs, and I didn't hear him because the dogs came with me and their collars jingled loud enough I couldn't hear him. He'd been abusive, but after throwing a heavy lamp at my head in the dark, I knew he'd kill me. I couldn't leave that night because he took my keys, but I ran away to a safe house as soon as he left the house. I'd recently moved to another country and met an American guy with whom I'd decided to go drinking in a small village about half an hour away from the city where we both lived. We had a few beers, some laughs, a little karaoke, and decided to call it a night. My seal had broken much earlier in the night and, in the taxi on the way home, nature called once more. I tried to hold it as long as I could, but it was a beer piss after all. At this point, I only knew a few words in the local language, so I asked my pal, who was fluent, to translate to the driver that I'd appreciate it if he'd pull over so I could relieve myself. I've learned since then that the locals have a habit of A, pretending they don't understand foreigners if it inconveniences them, B, make no effort to listen when a foreigner speaks because they assume they won't understand, or C, genuinely don't understand due to pronunciation and/or quirks related to different local dialects. I have no idea which of the aforementioned language barriers occurred on this particular night, but the driver continued to ignore the American even after he had repeated himself numerous times. I finally resigned myself to the fact that I was either going to have to hold it in or piss myself in the back seat of this dude's cab when, suddenly, the American, fed up with what he, wrongly or rightly perceived as being ignored, grabs the wheel of the car and spins us off of the road. We go hurtling into a field. The driver slams on the brakes and we narrowly avoid smashing headfirst into a tree. For the next 30 seconds or so, I have no idea what happened because I immediately jumped out of the car to ease my bladder. After the jubilation over my release had worn off, it finally occurred to me what the fuck had just happened. I looked up and saw the American guy scuffling with the taxi driver that he had just scared half to death. He broke free and we started across the field. About 500 meters away from the car, he realized that he'd left his bag, including his passport, in the car. He went back and I left. I hitchhiked for around 10 minutes along the road until somebody picked me up. I later discovered that the guy was an ex-Marine with the words "I will kill you" tattooed across his chest. The armed forces had seriously screwed him up and he had huge anger issues. I always found him pleasant enough, but after that experience, I kept a little distance. As to what happened after he returned to the car, I never got the full story. I expect he had to pay reparations to the driver and a bribe to the police. What is your best ghost paranormal experience story? My brother's bedroom was next door to mine growing up. One afternoon, he asked me what I was doing the previous night that made me laugh so much. Confused, I pressed him for details. About 3 a.m. last night, your laughter woke me up. It sounded like you were pacing your room too, pacing and laughing. At this point, I told him that I wasn't home last night. I'd been at a friend's house. He went pale. To this day, he swears blind that it was my laugh. I have a very distinct laugh, apparently. Camping at a friend's family property with a group of friends. They had a huge dingy shop full of old tools and old furniture that was super creepy. Dirt floor, clown paintings in the loft, not even kidding. We stayed up late drinking by the fire and I was the last one awake. went to go pee on the side of the shop, and stood about 5 feet away looking inside through the window. There was a fluorescent light on, and I noticed what looked like a piece of paper or dollar kind of floating around. I thought it was a moth at first, but it was moving in a very flowing figure 8 pattern that was very rhythmic. It reminded me of dangling a carrot. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds, which felt like forever. Then it quickly floated back to the corner of the shop where it was dark. There was also a wood chair near the corner that added to the creepiness. Could have been a moth though. I sat back down by the fire to finish my beer and have a smoke. No one else was awake, so I played Robot Unicorn Attack 2 on my phone for a while. I noticed my friend Mark pop out of his tent to pee, then go back into sleep. I decided sleep sounded good, so I went to my tent and fell asleep. The next morning, we were having breakfast and Mark said, "I saw you guys sitting by the fire super late. How late did you stay up?" I told him I was probably 2 or 3 a.m. Then he said, "Who was up with you?" I told him I was the last man standing. He said, "I got up to pee and saw you on your phone and 2 people over your shoulder watching you play." He said one person looked bigger, so he thought it was one of our friends who was a bigger dude. He said the other person was taller and skinny, but none of us are noticeably tall or skinny. Freaked me out. We still camp at the property once a year, but I don't go in the shop, and I go to sleep whenever my wife decides she's tired. This is my brother's story, but it's a good one. He was working as a night porter at an old hotel from the 18th century in northern English countryside. One night, a woman came down to reception as white as a sheet with her suitcase, saying she could not sleep and did not want to stay there. My brother inquired as to why. She said she could hear children laughing all night, and a child had entered her room with a candle and was standing at the foot of her bed and wouldn't leave. My brother mentioned it to his manager the following morning, and he was told that it is a regular occurrence. Before the hotel was a hotel, it used to be a school and kindergarten over 100 years ago. When my middle child was about 2.5 to 3, we lived in an old house with a lot of poorly built self-done renovations done on it. There was an underhouse storage area workshop area accessible from one of the bedrooms. This workshop has a hatch door to the dirt under the house. Anyway, my daughter used to complain about the blue lady that lives under the house. We moved and never heard about it again. A bit paranormal? Perhaps. My grandfather got into the hospital on a Friday night. Nothing too unusual. He wasn't doing good, but he had been there before. The next day I go to work. I'm somewhat worried, but again, he'd been there before. I go on with my day. There are customers. A friend stops by and we talk, and I fill the rest of the time with homework. My grandfather is in the back of my mind, but I have other stuff going on, you know? Right around 4 o'clock, I was chatting with a coworker when I glanced at the clock and my stomach dropped. I randomly got filled with dread and profound sadness. I continue chatting, but the feeling persists. I check out at 5, the feeling of gloom persisting, and of course my brain goes to my grandfather. I just knew. I get home and my mother tells me my grandfather passed away. I ask around what time. 4 o'clock. When I was a kid, my favorite uncle was the youngest in the family. He was my hero. He had just finished high school and I was like 10 or 11. We would go and visit on spring break and over the course of the summer, and I always looked forward to seeing the guy. We'd listen to records and tapes, and he introduced me to bands like The Cult and In Excess, The Doors, Bowie, Stevie Ray Vaughan. As I entered my teenage years, my life started, and my friends became the center of my universe, and those spring break and summer visits eventually stopped happening. Eventually I graduated high school, and around the same time, my uncle started a family. A few years out of high school, and my mom called me up and let me know my uncle had passed away. I hadn't seen him in a few years, and when I asked what happened, the only reply I could get was, he was sick. It wasn't until years later I found out he had taken his own life. He didn't leave a note or anything, but the general consensus was he learned he didn't have long to live and he took the easy way out. Here's where things get interesting for me. Shortly after the funeral, I start having dreams. I'm a pretty lucid dreamer, not in the sense that I can decide what I want to happen in a dream, but I can recall my dreams in vivid detail. Maybe there's another word for that, I don't know. Anyways, I started having dreams about my uncle. Sometimes we were just sitting in his room from when I was a kid, listening to music and making jokes. Over time, they became very strange. One dream I had, we were in a movie theater sitting really close to the screen and we were eating popcorn. The screen was playing something, but I couldn't distinguish what it was, and my uncle was talking, but I could not figure out what he was trying to say. Another was the two of us in a hallway and all the doors were locked. The most troubling dream I had about the guy which was also the most recurring, is when I would find him sitting at a rope bridge. He would stare at this bridge and get up and try to walk across it, but there are snakes that would strike at him when he tried to cross. A snake would snip at him and he'd go back to where he was sitting and just look at me, then look at the bridge. So I'd walk on this bridge and look across, and every few feet is a very angry snake all the way across. I grabbed my uncle's hand and took him out on the bridge, and he would be apprehensive because of the snakes. So I stood in front of him and kind of hopped up and down on the bridge. The momentum, or whatever you call it, from me bouncing on this rickety old bridge made the snakes angry, but if you bounced enough on it, the snakes would eventually teeter over the side. It was a very strange eureka kind of dream. So my uncle would step out onto the bridge, walk a few feet, bounce the bridge so the snakes would fall off. The dream would always end with my uncle making it across the bridge and me getting this feeling of reluctance to follow him across. Then I would wake up with this overwhelming feeling of sadness. These dreams happened for almost 20 years, always the same. Me and my uncle shooting the shit, or me helping him solve a puzzle of some sort. The snake and rope bridge was the most common. Never told a soul in my family about what my uncle and I were up to. I always thought it would be upsetting, like he wasn't at rest, like he was in purgatory or something. Maybe he was. I eventually just came to accept that my uncle was haunting me, and for the most part, I didn't mind. My grandmother died a few years ago. Nothing tragic. She caught pneumonia and never really recovered from it. One night she went to sleep and never woke up. We celebrated her life, hugged and healed the way families do when death comes to visit. Since my grandmother's funeral, I haven't had a single dream about my uncle, not one. I think that was the confirmation I needed, that there's something out there for us after we die. Or maybe my grandmother passing away was the catharsis I needed to let my uncle go. I look back on it now, and I like to think that my uncle was just lost. He was lost in life, and that carried on in death. I also think my grandmother, on her way to the sweet hereafter, found her baby boy, picked him up, dusted him off, and brought him home. I had just started a new job. The building I worked in was really old, definitely pre-war. I had to stay a bit later than I normally would to get something done, and by the time I was packing up to leave, my floor was pretty empty. I needed to use the restroom before I left, so I walked over there, and as I approached the door, I saw someone else open the door and go in. I remember vividly that they were wearing a pink shirt and khakis, because that's what I was wearing too. I was also mildly annoyed because I don't like being in the bathroom when someone else is in there. After deciding I still definitely needed to pee before the commute home, I entered the bathroom. But when I got in, it was completely empty. I don't know how to describe the energy in the room, but it was very tense, completely silent. I remember being able to hear my heartbeat. After standing completely frozen for what felt like 10 minutes, it was probably like 15 seconds, I turned right around and left. I had nightmares about that bathroom for weeks. It seemed so simple and uninteresting compared to a lot of other people's stories here, but it really shook me. There was something definitely off about the whole thing. Glad I work from home now. A few years back, some friends and I were driving on some back roads in a patch of woods believed to be haunted. One of my friends was getting bored, so he rolled down the window and shouted, "Make something happen," or something along those lines. About 5 seconds after he rolls up the window, there's a strong, seemingly too well timed to be natural knock on the window closest to me. We've seen some weird shit in those woods, but nothing that couldn't be explained by shadows or animals. There is no explanation for that knock. Nothing was thrown at the car. We weren't moving. It sounded the way a knock made by a human hand sounds, etc. Actually, later on, we heard a very feminine shriek in those woods with no explanation either, so there's that. Small but weird. I rented a room in a New England farmhouse grad school. First night, about 2 a.m, I had a very, very clear feeling I was being checked out by some sort of house spirits, but they approved. I went back to sleep. First time my girlfriend came over, she sat up in bed. I asked what's up, and it was almost word for word. Something was checking her out, but there was no threat. A few weeks later, my brother came over. Next morning, unprompted, as he came downstairs, he said he felt like something was checking him out at night, but it was okay. A new housemate later said the same thing his first morning. None of them knew each other. It was weird. When I was like 14, I was with a friend riding mountain bikes way out in the woods. We decided to turn back and go home for the day. We must have been 2 miles from any houses. Walking up the hill we just rode down from was this old guy with a miner clothes from the 1800s carrying a bucket. He was walking up the hill with his back toward us. He was only there for a few seconds and then disappeared. We were both silent when I said, I thought I saw something. He goes, yeah, me too. He perfectly described the guy. We got out of there very quick. This was in northern Arizona where they used a gold mine. There was even this old miner's cabin about a mile from us. The house I grew up in was haunted. The way it was laid out, I could see from my bedroom down the hall and into the living room. My parents' bedroom door was on the other side of the living room, directly across from my door. Late at night, I would hear someone pacing circles in the living room, but I was the only one awake in the house and we didn't have pets. I never said anything because I didn't want the family to think I was nuts. Eventually, I moved out and went to college. After I graduated, I was in a rough spot financially. My parents had bought a new house. The old one was still empty. They were considering getting renters and offered it to me to stay in for a while. I said no, I didn't want to move in. Mom asked why. I finally gave in and told her I thought there was a ghost. My mom froze and turned to look at me and was like, "You hear her too?" Turns out she had also heard it for years and didn't say anything for the same reason. In 2012, my grandmother suffered a major stroke, resulting in hospice in her home with her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren by her side. Friends and family were able to come by freely and spend time with her. I was very close to my grandma and was lucky to be able to share much of this time with her. For anyone that has ever been through hospice with a loved one, you'll understand how hard this type of thing can be. One night, I was sitting at home in my office, catching up on some work, when all of a sudden the room filled with the scent of perfume. I'm not talking about a faint smell. I'm saying it was very distinctive and strong throughout the entire room. I stopped everything I was doing and said out loud to myself, "Something is wrong. That is Graham." I had not spoken to my family that day, but felt an urgent need to send a text message to my uncle, whom was staying with her, to ask, "You guys okay?" This was at 11:20 p.m. I get a response right away saying, "Might want to come say goodbye. Not okay." I quickly rushed over. Upon arrival, the living room where my family was congregated was very silent, filled with blank faces. Without saying anything, I walked straight to my grandmother and kissed her on the forehead, saying I love her. She was still warm, but no longer breathing. I told my uncle that I was there because Grandma had brought me there. I asked when she passed, and he replied saying 5 minutes before I sent my text. This puts the perfume in my office at nearly the exact same moment. Now, I'm going to say that I was born into an Irish Catholic family, but I am in no way a religious person. I would have been the first person to discount this type of story if you told it to me, but I must say, this experience had me thinking that there really is something more out there. I felt it. My mother's story. I've no reason to doubt her, and she's never told another or been concerned with the supernatural. She does have a vaguely spiritual streak, but that's all. Mostly she's pretty no-nonsense. When she retired, she got heavily into family history. At some point, she obtained the diary of my dad's mother, who'd passed perhaps 20 years previously, who we all called Nan. Nan had been a very stiff and proper English type, called everyone dear, used adjectives like terribly and perfectly dreadful, and was always relentlessly formal and seemed to be slightly offended at all times. She was also an intensely private person and never wanted anyone knowing her business. So, one night, my dad was away and my mother, home alone, sits down with a diary and starts going through it. It starts raining. Nothing unusual since they live on the coast. She gets up and closes a few windows, goes back to the diary. The rain turns into a storm. It gets windy. She goes to the other room and shuts the window there, comes back to the diary. A few more minutes go by. She's been looking at the diary for maybe 15 minutes at that point. Suddenly, the intercom to her right bursts to life at full volume with just static coming from the speaker. They live in a 3-story house on the side of a hill that was originally built by an electrician, so there are a million lights, power points on every wall, and every room has an intercom. After recovering from the fright, she turns off the intercom. The one in the next room is still going full blast. She gets up and shuts that off, and can hear the rest of the house downstairs still going, every intercom. She heads down to the middle level, where the master unit is, and turns the intercom off. She's heading upstairs when she notices all the pictures on the walls. My mother is heavily into hanging things on the walls, big, small paintings, family photos. There's a lot of frames on the walls, are all askew, all at similar angles, not random. Meanwhile, the storm has increased. The floor she is on line the length of the house on one side with timber-framed windows. Even the tops of the windows are wet with rain, which rarely happens and takes a proper storm to do. As she stood there, taking this all in, what she can only describe as an intense gust of wind rattles the windows from one end of the house to the other as if a speeding train went past on the balcony outside. Instead of fleeing into the night in search of a hotel room and real estate agent as I would have done, she walks calmly upstairs, calmly shuts the diary, calmly puts it in the cupboard, shuts the cupboard, says, "Sorry, Nan," to the empty room, and goes to make a cup of tea. The storm dies down. She writes all the pictures. That's it. Here's the kicker. Someone from her work lives on the same street, like 10 houses away. When she sees him the next day, she mentions the storm. "What storm?" comes the reply. She's like, "What do you mean, what storm? I'm talking about the Gale 4 storm we had last night." The guy looks at her funny and says he would have known if there was a storm since they had dinner on the balcony that night and there wasn't a storm at any point. Reading this back, it sounds completely made up. I can only swear it isn't. I lack the imagination to make up something like this. Shout out to Nan. If she's somehow reading this, I promise I won't be reading your diary. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I was at my grandmother's house for Christmas and was playing hide and seek with some of my cousins. For context, the house was big, worn down Victorian house that had been moved from its original location to the plot of land my grandmother owned. It was very cold and drafty, especially in certain rooms. The upstairs where we were playing consisted of 4 bedrooms, 3 of which opened to a large landing, one of which was down a longish hall. Most of us, along with our immediate families, were staying the night, but for some reason, no one ever stayed in that 4th room. As a child, I always thought it was my grandfather's room. He died about 10 years prior to my birth, but in hindsight, I'm not sure why. As far as I know, that wasn't true, and certainly no one ever told me it was. Anyway, it was around 8 p.m. and my turn to count, and of course, the person counting went into the separate room to do so. I sat on the bed, closed my eyes, and counted to 20. When I opened my eyes, it was light out, morning. I'd closed my eyes at night, counted to 20, and somehow 12 hours had passed. Of course, the immediate thought is that maybe I just fell asleep. I'll refute that with 3 points. First, why didn't my cousins come get me when I failed to seek them? Second, it was cold in that house. We would sleep multiple people to a bed under several blankets, at least one of which was usually electric. I can't imagine sleeping through that night in that kind of cold without some kind of covering. And third, there's no way my parents would have bothered to come find me before they went to sleep. And when they did find me, they wouldn't have left me there, especially without a blanket. I can't tell you what happened. Maybe I had some sort of strange memory lapse that just happened to begin and end in the same location. Maybe the simulation lagged. Maybe I really did skip 12 hours. All I can say for sure is that something happened that night, and I've never been able to explain it. Not a ghost story or paranormal, but a true experience. Many years ago, I was working in a shop and an old lady had purchased several bags of shopping. It was a little icy outside and I knew the lady lived less than 100 yards away from the shop, so I offered to take her shopping home for her. She was shocked that I would offer and ever so grateful. On the way to her house, she kept saying thank you to me. I told her it was no problem and I was happy to help. She said she wished more people like me were helpful, etc., etc. As we reached her door, she opened it and stepped away so I could enter. I told her that I was okay holding the bags and she should go into the house and get out of the cold. She thanked me again and stepped in the doorway and took a few steps down the hall. I walked in behind her and put the shopping bags on the floor. I asked her if she wanted me to help her put things away and she insisted I had done enough and thanked me again and again. I stepped outside and turned round to say bye to her. As she was closing the door, she said, "Thank you, young man. I will watch over your soul from heaven." A few days later, she was found dead in her home, in the hallway, next to a few bags of slowly rotting shopping. What is your best ghost or paranormal experience story? Part 2. Me, reading these stories while my cat looks at me from down my darkened hallway, her eyes reflecting the light, LOL. I've had a bunch, but one that stands out was probably the time when my youngest son had gotten me up crying about a bad dream he was having at 3 a.m. He was 4 at the time. I calmed him down, then he told me he's hungry, so we go to the kitchen for a snack. He's sitting there eating cereal when he just kind of looks up and then casually tells me the boy who woke him up is sitting in the corner crying, and he nods to an empty corner of the room by the table where we're seated. I ask him why the kid is crying, just kind of humoring him, when he tells me his mommy crashed the car up the road and now he's trying to figure out what's going on. He woke me up. Please tell him to go. So me thinking it's my kid still shook from the bad dream, look at the corner and say, "Hey kid, go back to your mom." We keep sitting there, and my son finishes his cereal and hands me the bowl. Just kind of joking around, I ask him if it worked, and the kid left. And he looks at me really seriously and says, "Yes, he told me the ambulance is coming, so it's okay. They're all dead anyways." And not even a minute later, a string of cop cars and an ambulance go past our house, sirens blazing. And I got this feeling of the most intense dread while the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I shook it off, told myself it's just a kid's imagination and coincidence. We went back to bed. A few days later, my neighbor tells me about the big wreck a mile up the street from us where some lady was going too fast and flipped a car coming around a curve and no one survived. At 3 a.m, on the night my kid had woken me up, I didn't dare ask her if a little boy was in the car. Not sure if it was a ghost or something like that, but back in 2015 when I was younger, I was at my cousin's place. We were hanging out in her grandpa's backyard. As we were messing around, we hear screaming and banging coming from the living room window of the house. We look up and see a woman crying hysterically and hitting the windows. We shout and ask her if she's okay, but she tells us to leave her alone and shuts the window completely. Her grandpa and grandma weren't home at the time that happened. The strangest thing was, when we went into the house, the woman was gone, and we just brushed it off. I've got a few from my grandparents' ranch. The original house was built in the early 1800s, and the graveyard from the original family is still there. When my family first bought the property, the previous owners were still living there for a few weeks until they moved. My grandpa was out riding around and saw a guy from a distance dressed in slacks and a white shirt and suspenders. My grandpa assumed it was the previous owner, so he drove up to say hi. As he got closer, the guy walked behind a bush and seemingly disappeared into thin air. He told the previous owner about it and asked, was he wearing a white shirt and suspenders? Apparently, they've seen him a lot wandering around in the evening, almost always where my grandpa saw him too. A few months later, when I first visited, me and my cousin were playing PS2 in the living room around midnight. There's a huge sliding glass door facing the backyard and barn. I noticed 2 people walking around outside with what looks like rifles and Civil War caps. It looked like they were marching almost. Eventually, they kept going into the darkness, while me and my cousin were shitting ourselves in silence. Nothing really happened for the next few years besides footsteps and weird feelings. I would hear super loud footsteps at night and assume it's someone walking into the kitchen. I got creeped out, so if someone else was awake, I would take the opportunity to go get food. When I realized no one else was awake, I ran back into my room, LMAO. Fast forward to when I lived there during college. I had my own little cabin down the road. It was really creepy but cool. One night I had a friend over and we were up pretty late. We heard some footsteps on the gravel outside and then louder footsteps on the front porch. Then I saw a silhouette of someone through the window walking around. I jumped up to go make sure it wasn't some meth head, but when I walked out front, there was nobody there. And it's an open area, so there would be no place for anyone to run or hide. Safe to say we didn't get any sleep that night. That's about all the super creepy stories I have, but plenty of your typical paranormal things have happened over the years. This was on the Devil's Backbone in Texas, by the way. If you know the stories of that area, you know it's a creepy-ass place. Already told it, but when I was younger, like 3 or 4, my mom said I used to talk to someone or someone in the corner of my room. I would sit down and hold a conversation for hours. Mom would ask me who I was talking to, then one day I said, "Grandpa." I then said something about him. I think it was his mustache and something about a joke he used to tell. I couldn't have known any of this since he had died 3 years earlier, and I had never been told about him nor seen his picture since I was so little. When I was in my early 20s, I owned a hearse. It wasn't much to look at, but it was a lot of fun to own. Anyway, all funeral cars have a partition that separates the driving compartment from the coach area where the casket or gurney, yes, mine was that old, was kept. I would park the car in the morning when I got home from work, and that night, when I'd return to the car, the glass partition was open several inches. Every night I would close the glass, and every morning the glass would again be open. Some thought that someone was screwing with me, and I considered that. But to faithfully keep up that gag for well over a year is a bit much. It happened every single day. Not most days, but every day. I suspect that a spirit in the car did not like the partition closed for some reason. In the summer, it would get really hot back there, and in the winter, cold. The AC didn't work, and the heater core for the rear was bad. Maybe they wanted a better temp. It didn't bother me, and I actually thought it was kinda cool. This isn't my story directly, more my mother's story. When she was 7 or 8 months pregnant with me, she would accompany my biological father to the local stage theater where he acted in various productions for rehearsals. One job she had taken on her own, even months or years before she became pregnant, was to sit in various places in the house and take notes. She would sit in a few seats on different sides of the main level, including on the left side, right side, center, the row right behind the orchestra pit, and even in the very back row. She would go up into the balcony and sit in a few seats up there and in some of the box seats on either side of the theater. She sat in these areas, noting how the sets looked and how the actors looked on their marks from her angle. She would note if the orchestra sounded too loud, you couldn't hear the actors singing for musicals like The Music Man or Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, or were too quiet. She would pass these notes on to the director, producer, and other people who would need them. The set designer would get notes like tree blocking view of Charlie Brown on stage left. The orchestra conductor would have gotten a note like clarinets too loud for Wedding March / Sunrise Sunset from Fiddler on the Roof. One particular night, as rehearsal was starting to wrap up, my mom, being muy enciente with me, got up from her seat. As her feet were now hidden by her belly, it was difficult to see where she was walking, even more so since the lights in the house hadn't come up yet. Heading down a flight of stairs, she took a misstep and almost fell over when she felt somebody take a strong, firm grip on her upper arm and pull her back. She felt that same grip suddenly pull her forward, but very gently, and it never released until she got to the landing near the exit. She turned to thank the person who helped her down, but there was nobody there. Me and my family went on a holiday to Indonesia in 2019, and I shared a hotel room with my sister. The first morning, she mentioned that in the night, she'd seen someone walk across our room and stare out the window. She even heard the floorboards creak as they moved. She gets sleep paralysis pretty regularly, so we shrugged it off. 2 days later, I woke up in the middle of the night to see someone sat at the end of my bed, their hands cupping their face as they cried. I thought it was my sister and sat up. "You okay?" I asked and froze as I realized I could see my sister tucked up in her bed out of the corner of my eye. The figure, which was like a living silhouette, was clearly female with long hair tied back in a ponytail. I just kind of slowly lay back down, took out my phone, and started watching YouTube videos. I know that sounds stupid, but I figured there wasn't much else I could do. Every now and then, I'd look up and see the figure still there and then go back to watching my videos. This lasted about half an hour until I looked up and the woman was just gone. When I was a kid, I lived with just my mom. Every few nights after she went to bed and turned off all of the TVs, I'd hear a man and woman casually having a quiet conversation in our kitchen area. I always had to concentrate really hard to make sure I was actually hearing something because it was so faint I couldn't make out words. This continued for years, and I thought my mom wouldn't believe me if I told her. After we moved out, I finally told her. She said she'd always experienced the same thing. When I was young, I lived in a broken-ass town called Uniondale in the outbacks of the Karoo in South Africa. The house I lived in had several long corridors. One day, I went to my room to play with my toys, and when I walked in, this random guy was just sitting on a chair in my room. He told me to get out, and he told me this was his room. So I ran to my mother and told her about it, but when she stormed into my room, the man was gone. Fast forward a few months, I was in the kitchen baking a cake with my mom when several potatoes literally rolled into the kitchen from the corridor. No joke. They rolled into the room as if they had their very own momentum, but my mother and I were the only ones in the house at the time. Fast forward a few more months, my gran came to visit. After a few days of staying, she ran into the living room, telling us she saw a guy walking down our corridor. She described him, and I noted that her description fit the guy that was in my room. We moved out not long after. There was a ghost in my house when I was little that my parents both saw. My parents were exhausted. They had 3 young children and both had full-time jobs. This meant that they put a lot of their strange experiences on stress and being tired. That said, they would often see a child running by them when my siblings and me were accounted for somewhere else. My mom also described a hand tapping her shoulder and hearing a child saying, "Mom," but when she would turn over, there would be nothing there. This went on for months, and although my parents had both experienced this, they never mentioned it to each other. Then one night, my dad asked if my brother had a new set of PJs. My mom said no, and this was when they realized they had both been seeing this extra child. They talked to our neighbors at the time about this, and they said that a young boy had died of scarlet fever in that house in the 1950s. This was also weird, as my brother had had scarlet fever, but luckily had been okay. The last time I heard about this ghost appearance was when my brother had gone into his room and yelled at what he thought was me to get out of his room. I was in the bath. He was seeing the ghost. I never usually believe in ghosts, but it was the fact that so many people had seen this ghost on different occasions. I was too young to remember any of this, and so I only know what has been told to me about this. I never realized until last year that there was one of the reasons we had moved to houses. I used to do regular volunteer work at a religious shrine, and since I had to travel halfway across the country to get there, I was provided with accommodation. Said accommodation dated back centuries, and every time I stayed in it, something would happen that could not be explained in any logical way. But this story is my favorite. I had traveled all day, arriving at the shrine just as they were about to stop serving the evening meal. I grabbed some food and a shower before falling into bed since I was exhausted. Woke up around 3 a.m. to a woman's voice saying in a broad Yorkshire accent right next to my ear, "Are you alright, love?" I replied that I was fine, the way you do when you're still half asleep and not really focusing. And the next minute, I was sitting up in bed with all the lights on, asking myself what the hell just happened. Managed to get back to sleep eventually, and then the following morning, I ran into a member of the staff who had known me for many years. He asked how my journey had been, and I said that it had been fine, but that something really weird had happened during the night. He asked what room I'd been put in, and when I told him, his response was, "Oh, what did she say to you?" Come to find out that this was always the last room they would put anyone in because so many people had complained of hearing things in there. And when that wing of the building was being renovated, the builders used this room to store their equipment and always found things moved around. I have to say that after the initial shock, I wasn't scared because my dad, who had a great interest in the paranormal, had always told me that what most people think of as ghosts aren't malicious, but people who've lost their way and can't move on. Probably late to the party, but I used to work night shift in group homes for the mentally disabled or severely mentally ill. At one house I worked at, there was constant scratching coming from the walls. I figured it was just squirrels, but now I'm not too sure. We had set a lot of traps and never caught anything. But this isn't what made me a believer. What happened was one night, I was watching TV in the living room after all the residents had fallen asleep. Around 3 a.m., the doorbell starts ringing like someone is frantically pushing it. I get up and go to the door, but when I got there and opened it, nobody was there. Now, the 3 things you need to know about the entryway. First is that the entry is into the living room and I can see it from the couch. Second is that the front door has a very large window on it, 2/3 plus of the door is window. And lastly, that the walkway to the front doorknob is a 20 to 30 foot corridor that has a 12-foot brick wall on either side. So, in order to ding-dong ditch, you'd have to run back the entire length to be able to duck around a corner. I figured I was being pranked by one of our more mischievous residents, so I went and checked on them all, and they were all fast asleep. As soon as I finished shutting the last resident's door, the doorbell started frantically ringing again. I rushed to the door again, only to find nobody there. This time, I was determined to catch them, so I turned all the lights off except the TV and hid right beside the door so I'd be able to immediately open it when they came back. After 20 minutes, the doorbell started going insane again. I jumped out and quickly turned on the walkway lights and looked out the window, but nobody was there. I then opened the door, thinking maybe they were hiding to the side of the door like I had. After seeing nobody there, my stomach dropped and I got a feeling of dread. I slowly started closing the door. As soon as the door was almost closed all the way, the doorbell started going nuts again and stayed that way for at least 15 minutes before stopping again. It was almost as if whatever it was took great pleasure in mocking and taunting me. I locked the door and ran my ass to the couch after turning on all the lights I could. Another disturbing thing about this is that it seemed to read my mind. Whenever I got the urge to go outside and smoke, it would start with the doorbell again. It's like it didn't want me to forget it's there and a threat. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was a poltergeist. That place was rife with bad energy, as most group homes are. A lot of suffering and raw emotions happened at those places. It also didn't help. We had a resident there who had literally gone insane after watching his parents get murdered in front of him, and a medium, low-functioning schizophrenic with what I've confirmed of at least 8 distinct people talking to him in his head. Both of these residents are constantly having shit knocked off their shelves and walls in the middle of the night, and it's super common for them to be yelling at people that aren't there to shut up in the middle of the night. I used to think it was just mental illness, but now I'm not too sure. Also, years later, I worked in a facility where someone hung themselves in the bathroom. The bathroom door slams shut in the middle of the night if you try to leave it propped open, which is company policy. My youngest sisters are twins. Back before they were born, I remember this old lady I didn't know was hanging outside my neighbor's house said to me, "There's two. There's definitely two in there," roughly translated from my language. She comes to our house like 3 to 4 times and will always repeat that to me, so I always believed that we were going to have a twin. I even remembered walking up one night to pee and I saw my dad sitting on the sofa. He asked me what should we name my sisters, and I would recommend names in pairs. Stupid names, of course. I was like 6. Well, a couple of years before my mom passed away from cancer, we started going down memory lane, and my mom talked about having to come up for the second name from my sisters since they only prepared one. And I'm like, why only one? And mom said because they didn't know my sister was a twin. And I said, but we did know. The lady told us. And my mom said, no, we didn't know. Apparently both my dad and mom only found out about the twin after they came out. Creepy thing is, my dad did remember me suggesting 2 names and thought that I was just joking. I told him about the lady, but none of them remember her. One Sunday morning, I was in my kitchen having a cup of tea with my wife. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what I thought was my 3-year-old daughter walk out in the front room and into the entrance hall. I went to see what she was doing, and when I got there was no one there. I walked back into the kitchen and said to my wife something along the lines of, "I'm bloody seeing things. I could have sworn I saw Amelia walking to the front door, but when I got there, she was nowhere to be seen." My wife was like, "You're joking. The same thing happened to me and my mom just the other day." She explained how the same thing happened to them in the exact same spot, with the mysterious girl taking the exact same route. In fact, so convinced were they that they had seen our daughter that they crept into the entrance hall after her to make her jump, but there was no one there. It didn't end there though. A few months later, we saw a post on a local Facebook page saying, "I had a lovely childhood growing up in our address. I'd be really keen to speak to whoever lives there now, particularly to see if they've ever experienced any paranormal goings on." I direct messaged the poster and asked if she had ever seen anything untoward, without giving any indication of what we had experienced. Lo and behold, her and her sister used to see a little blonde Victorian girl in a white nightie standing outside their bedroom doors or walking through the house. She related how initially they would think it was the other sister and would go to investigate and find no one there. I'm a very cynical person by nature and did not previously believe in the paranormal, but I have no explanation for the above. What's the worst thing you've ever experienced or witnessed while driving? I was driving up to Mount Whitney last year, and on the Portal Road coming toward me, a guy in a convertible went around a turn and his car flipped into the air like 20 feet, almost as if a child playing with car toys were making it happen. For the first few moments, I didn't believe it was real, like I was daydreaming or something. And then the car spun out, rolled, etc., and landed in the bushes on the side of the road, completely wrecked. I thought, wow, I'm about to see a dead body for sure and will be scarred for years at how gruesome it will be. I approached the situation, and the guy just popped his head up and hopped out of the car unscathed. He didn't even appear in shock. I was like, "Holy frick, man, how are you alive?" And he was like, "Yeah, that sucked, man. I'm pissed about the car. I just got it." And I was thinking, maybe you should pump that you're alive to be pissed about the car. But yeah, it was pretty wild. When I was 17, I was driving myself to college. I came up on what was a large pool of blood that was covering the road. An officer waved me to keep going, and I was thinking about the poor deer that got hit, when as I was driving slowly through the blood, I looked to my left and saw the body covered in a white sheet on the side of the road. One creepy ass feeling to realize. 95 South in Virginia. Stuck in traffic during a snowstorm. Get up to the accident and see an SUV with the roof splayed half open under a semi-flatbed. Ouch, bad day for somebody. Traffic was still not moving. Get another 2 miles down the road 2 hours later and see the ambulance from the first accident flipped over in a ditch. Really bad day for somebody that death really didn't want to escape. Another time, 495 in Dulles Toll Road, a deer jumps on the road, and the car in front of me explodes said deer at about 60 miles per hour into surprisingly large chunks, viscera, and a rain slurry of blood and fur all over my car that no amount of wiper fluid could fix. I barfed so hard that my body kept trying to barf for 20 minutes or so after empty. Pulling the parts, some held together by strips of skin before the car wash would let me through, triggered another wave of dry heave so hard it felt like my asshole was trying to make an escape through my mouth. The amount of crazily dangerous overtaking on a bend, just cannot understand it. Oh, and this one time it was really foggy, and this guy overtook me at speed. He flew past me. Remember thinking, I'd love for him to get caught. About 30 seconds later, I see flashing lights emerge from the fog up ahead, and the guy had been pulled over. I was delighted. Not bad in an accident way, but stupidity. I was on my way to work approaching an intersection. I saw a minivan sitting at a stoplight and watched them slowly pull into the road in front of me. Whatever happens all the time. So I just moved into the other lane. Right as I got alongside them, they start merging into my lane. I laid on the horn and scared the ever-loving fuck out of the brainlet driving the minivan after she jumped about a foot off her seat. She stared over terrified, like I just appeared out of thin air, just 100% oblivious that there were other vehicles on the road. The worst part was, it was winter and my truck is red, not exactly a vehicle that blends in with the snow. It was a few years ago. We were teens, on our way with friends to the countryside festival. As we drive, we see a car on a small hill. Everything is covered in smoke, so we pull up and we get out of the car and start running toward the car. On our way, there was drainage, 1 meter deep approximately, and then the hill starts. We cross it, and it is pitch black winter. As I run, it seems that the driver is cut in half. The torso is on top of the roof, moving a bit, and everything else is inside the car. You think to yourself, what the F did I get myself into? But you just continue to rush. It is your duty. As we approached the car, the driver had picked up a young moose. It was the moose whose torso was on the roof, half alive, and the rest of the body in the passenger's seat. Meanwhile, the driver is knocked out in the driver's seat. We ripped off the doors open and got the driver out. He's fine, but in a shock state. 2 more cars pull up. It appeared that the driver was drunk and was flying at speed above 100 kilometers per hour, 62 miles per hour, so he flew over drainage and flew to the top of the hill with the whole moose. For a few minutes, the moose was alive and trying to pull his body out of the car, but no luck. He can't be saved. He screams last time and passes away. That day, I also had finished my first aid course so I can get my driver's license. This image haunts me to this day and reminds me while driving, never ever drink and drive. And also, do not speed between forest roads, and in general, do not speed. I was driving next to a Mustang on the highway, and all of a sudden the lamppost just blinked out. Took me a second to realize what had happened. People behind us attended to the driver and passenger while I pulled the lamppost off the highway. Hitting a deer. My dad was driving. It was nighttime and it was a pair. He saw the second one, but not the one that was running directly in front of our truck. I hit a turkey once and that was awful too. I pulled over and the damn thing wasn't dead. I didn't want it to suffer, so I was trying to figure out how to finish it off, sobbing hysterically. Thankfully it died. That was years ago and I still feel terrible. I was stuck in a sudden traffic jam for a few minutes on the Autobahn once. Light traffic, early afternoon on a Saturday. It came out of nowhere. Finally drive by the cause. A guy in a BMW had hit the back end of a box truck with a faulty bumper. The corner of the truck went right into the passenger side of the windshield where his young 11 or 12-year-old daughter was. The ambulance was just coming into view. He was cradling her in his arms, sobbing and rocking back and forth. She was limp. I'll never get that out of my head. Sitting in a red light with my friend and his baby in the back seat in the baby seat, hearing loud screeching brakes. A split second later, a pickup truck slams into the back of an SUV. Just out of nowhere, no warning. It literally happened right next to us. The front of the pickup was so smashed up and the driver was doubled over the wheel. We were in an old Volvo. I think the thing that scares me the most is wondering what would have happened to the baby if the pickup would have hit us instead. A few years ago, driving home from work at 11 p.m., 30-mile trip, it was the apocalypse. Black ice the entire way. Over a dozen accidents on my side alone. a 30-car pileup the other direction. So many cars in the ditch, and someone hit one of the giant lights they put up on the freeway, and it was down on my side. Fortunately, I was doing about 5 miles per hour and got around it. It was like the highway in Zombieland. My parents were driving my sister, myself, and a friend of mine to a Mannheim Steamroller concert. We were on the interstate when suddenly a car flew across the lanes and missed us by a few feet. We watched the car hit the side and then proceed to bounce and flip several times before landing upside down. It's been over 15 years and I can still hear the crunch of the metal. We stopped. Dad assessed her while Mom called 911. Other cars stopped to help. They kept her upside down until paramedics arrived and were able to safely remove her. Never found out why she swerved across 3 lanes of traffic. My father being in the passenger seat, I'm already one to be a touch nervous about driving to begin with, as so many people where I live, and I'm sure all over, love to cut you off last minute, drive while on their cell phones constantly, then add him in there saying I'm doing this too slow or too quick, and all the side commentary. It just really gets on my nerves and makes me even more distracted. It's why I hate driving with him anywhere, cause he overdoes stuff to the point where my nerves are on edge and I'm like jittery and have to walk it off a bit. About time we get where we need to go. Probably not going to be as bad as some other people here, but I was asked to take a friend to the airport on my way to work. No big deal. I was close by and early enough that it wasn't too far out of my way. However, that day was when the biggest snowstorm hit the UK in years. What should have been a 1-hour drive took us 5 hours, partially due to the terribly icy conditions, but also due to the fact that the motorway was so jam-packed that my GPS took us through back roads and winding country paths, narrow, slippy, and dangerous. Not only that, but we couldn't even pull into the airport as traffic was intense. So we parked at a petrol station about a mile away and trudged through the snow. I told my friend to leave her luggage in the car. It was obvious by this point she had missed her flight. She was in dire distress because her flight was on the day her visa ran out, and she was terrified she'd be fined for overstaying her visa. I assured her that due to circumstances, we could explain and she'd be given some allowance. Once in the airport, we were stuck for another hour. I had to call my work and explain I wouldn't be able to make it in today. When we finally made it to the desk, they explained that the flight had been canceled anyway, and all the passengers were being offered a new flight the next day, contingent on weather conditions. We agreed, and then trudged back to the car a mile away to return home, thankfully, by which time the motorway had cleared. I was driving to a band rehearsal one night, and I heard a sound like a car hitting something really big, and I looked around, but I didn't see any other cars, and nothing looked like it had been hit or fallen over. Still have no idea. Not as bad as some stories here, but scary for me. I was driving to the mall in November 2019 to meet my dad and stepmom to look at new cell phones and got pulled over by the cops on the way there. Yeah, I was nervous as fuck. They thought I was running from them. I wasn't. They questioned me for like 10 minutes and then let me go without a warning or a ticket. That was the first time I've been pulled over, and so far, the only time I've got pulled over. I'm honestly surprised I didn't get a ticket where I'm young and cops tend to give young drivers tickets, and those cops are very strict. Got very lucky that day. Wasn't technically driving as I was in the drive-thru, but I saw a homeless lady pull down her pants on the busiest street in town, take a dump, then wipe her ass with her hand. That was not what I wanted to see while waiting for food. My husband once stopped at the gas station on the way to work. It was 4:30 a.m., and there was a car with 4 big guys in it. They followed my husband to work and started hitting on him in a threatening way. I honestly don't think they were gay, but just trying to scare my husband. One more. I was taking my mom and brother to the bank one day. There's lots of traffic. For some reason, the city bus let some guy off in the center lane of a busy 6-lane road, 3 on each side. Dude doesn't pay attention, went around the front of the bus and got hit by a truck. He flew a couple of feet, landed on his back, jumped up like he didn't just get hit and walks away. Luckily, traffic was at a standstill and the truck driver's lane had just started moving. Otherwise, the guy would have been hit by someone going 40 miles an hour. I was out for a relaxing drive in an area really in the middle of nowhere, around 10 miles from town, around 1 a.m. I passed by a car pulled over to the side of the road with a lady standing by some dude laying on the ground. I figured I'd turn around and check the status. I was thinking this guy was a passenger that got drunk and needed to throw up, then passed out on the side of the road. Well, that was sort of the case. Yes, he was drinking a lot from what I heard, and he and the lady had an argument where he decided to exit the car going at what I guess was highway speeds. Well, he was very dead when I checked him. Not like super gory, but his eyes were open and a large pool of blood was coming from the back of his head. I had to call 911 as she was in a panic. So much for a relaxing drive that day.